Here's what nobody told you about Adam and Eve. This creation story did not start here, even though Christians want to tell you it did, even though Bible-believing people want to say, no, everything started here and all the other stories took from that. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Robert M. Price will be showing you in this discussion of how the pieces to Adam and Eve and the creation story of the garden and all these things pieced together from other sources. Now, we don't go exhaustive, but we give you enough evidence to see and go, ooh, what's really going on here? What have we been told? Is it all a lie? Why have we been told these stories? And why do we have to be packaged to believe the way that Christians or other Bible believers want it to be told? This is something interesting. You guys subscribe, like, and comment down below your opinion on what you think is going on. Let us know what you think of the show. We are Myth Vision. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Your host, Derek Lambert. Pagan parallels to Adam. Adam, the first man, the biblical character, according to Genesis, that was made from the dust of the earth, and God breathed a living soul into him. Sounds legit, right? Well, not if you're a fan of Myth Vision. You guys know a cartoon when you see one. However, we have Dr. Robert M. Price, who has been with us many times, and he's joining again. How are you, Dr. Bob?
Oh, doing great. And by the way, I would like to point out, in case anybody's somehow unaware of it, this is National Pizza Day. And I hope all patriotic Americans out there will give the pizza joints some business. Carol is making one of her unbelievably great homemade pizzas here. Not every pizza will be up to that standard, but still, it's worth pledging allegiance to pizza on National Pizza Day.
Nice. Dr. Bob, I want to jump into some accusations first and foremost, because you dropped a heretical bomb. Not a Hiroshima bomb, a heretical bomb. And this heretical bomb was pagan parallels to Jesus, the one and true Son of God. Why would you do such a thing? Those are just conflated parallel mania. You've crossed the line, Dr. Bob. You've taken things too far. You're purposely trying to find things that aren't there. And you're going to try and do that again today. And so I want to read one of our comments on the latest video we did, Pagan Parallels to Jesus, Destroying Christian Apologetics. And this is, I'm going to name him, I don't care. Armchair Philosopher has to say, in a debate including parallel mania, agnostic Bart Ehrman humiliated and intellectually flogged Dr. Bob. Smarmy Dr. Bob passes off speculation for gospel truth. He can't take out a historical Jesus, so Dr. Bob resorts to tinfoil hat conspiracies, which YouTube crowds are primed for. I forgot my tinfoil hat today, Dr. Bob, but I decided a doecistic tinfoil hat would suffice, and so you can't see it, but it's there. You can see my hands actually kind of touching it. So do you have something you could say to that, Dr. Bob?
Well, for one thing, apologists like to misuse Samuel Sandmel's phrase or word, parallelomania. Sandmel had something very specific in mind. For him, parallelomania, and he coined the term, referred to the tendency of some scholars to invoke fragmentary ancient texts that do parallel or correspond to beliefs or a storyline or whatever. In the fragment we have, there are parallels to something in the Bible, for example, but we don't really know how it ends. And so you can't just assume that the whole thing was completely parallel to a biblical myth or whatever. And he didn't mean to say that you couldn't come up with comparative religion or comparative mythological parallels that were important between Jesus and Tammuz and all that sort of thing. No, he was only talking about the gratuitous inference that, well, if it's parallel to this point and we don't really know what happened next, we can assume that it was the same. No, you can't. You can't do that. That is an error. So he was condemning that, but you never, at least in the many apologetics works I have read, I've never heard it used that way. I'm sure it has, but what they do most of the time is to say, oh, to invoke parallels that are attested between Jesus and Baal or Osiris or whatever. That doesn't mean a thing. Why not? That's not what Sandmel meant. And if you want to use his term, you should restrict it to that, but they're not. They're trying to hijack that term and say that history of religions parallels, as scholars call them, that they really don't mean a thing. And this is just, it seems to me, obviously a dodge, an attempt to dismiss evidence that they don't like, that would be threatening. Now, I have to admit that such arguments from parallels are speculative, as the armchair gent said, but I've never claimed anything else. I'm always eager to remind people who agree with me or don't that this is speculation, given the fragmentary nature of the evidence in general. And you have to always keep that in mind, so it's inappropriate to dogmatize about it, which I never do, especially on this issue, did Jesus exist or not? Every time I talk about this, I say there may have been a Jesus. It's just that given the nature of historical judgments, that they're always probabilistic and open to revision or refutation. I mean, you never know what's going to come up, whether some new discovery or some ingenious reasoning that someone had came up with that nobody had thought of before. You never know what's going to come up. So no historian just dogmatizes about things, especially when we're talking about the remote past and so forth. I mean, there's things like, did the Nazi Holocaust happen? Well, yeah, that's a matter of living memory, and there's no way to deny this. But the tinfoil hat thing, the recourse to conspiracy theories, that's sort of that's a parallel to the parallelomania error. There are conspiracies. Does anybody think there have never been conspiracies? Surely there are. The question is, can you give adequate reason to believe this? Like, was Donald Trump a stooge of the Russians? That they were beaten at to death for 3 years, and the investigations of it said, no, there's no reason to think there was. Well, it wasn't outrageous to suggest that there could have been a conspiracy between an American presidential candidate and a foreign power. Sure, it's happened. But did it happen this time? Well, no reason to think so. So to say conspiracy theories is, again, to try to rule everything out before you even look at the evidence. The point is, you got to look at the evidence and see if it seems to imply such a thing. A real conspiracy theory about the historical Jesus would be, I think, Roman authorship theories. But even there, the conspiracy that is posited is not implausible. It's if you said that the Gospels are written by space aliens, as some basically say, that's a conspiracy. Again, the idea that there are space aliens is not crazy. You just need the evidence for it. And I can't help but think that apologists, like the person who is poking fun at me here, is just finds it a priori unacceptable. And so he appeals to Barth to have made a fool of me uh, because he likes Bart on this point.
Right.
Uh, I mean, I was actually there in the debate, and it's a question of like if this man could show how Bart flogged me and all that stuff. That's another story. I've written a whole book on Bart and his approach to various issues called Bart Ehrman Interpreted, where I defend him on some things and dissent on other ones. And he might want to read that, though I rather doubt he will. But it's just that the attitude on this, you're not going to catch me ridiculing people I disagree with, except on particular points that I think are so egregiously absurd it would give them too much credit to speak of them respectfully. But it's got to be pretty weird for me to go that route. So I just think the person's attitude is one of invincible partisanship, that he's just not going to listen to anything. And if he would like to go on and give reasons for thinking I have a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, go ahead. I'm open to being refuted. I
Yeah.
don't really have a dog in the race. I'm not getting rich off of this. Nobody is. I'm not employed by any atheist group and so on. But he's welcome to his opinion, obviously.
Well, freedom of speech, right? And I guess sometimes that can work against us. But anyways, let's go to Adam. I mean, this guy was like the literal first man of humanity, right? And this story, even believers, some believers take it somewhat allegorical. They don't take it as literal, so to speak. And then they're for good reason, very good reason to suspect these things. But this character, Adam, it seems like the New Testament authors actually believe the way that it sounds written, that there was a first Adam, whatever that is. I don't know if Paul thinks this was the first literal guy, but it sounds like from one man, all the peoples of the earth. It sounds like he buys into the narrative that this is the first guy, and this is how all the humans of the earth, and God is not far from each one of us. Somewhere in Acts, it talks about this. And it gives this weird idea, like they really do believe this Adam guy. Well, we want to talk about pagan parallels, right? So we want to find Adam, but we want to find things. I guess where we could start is like, when do you place the writing of this character, Adam, in Genesis? Where do you put that? Because that might matter in terms of how you're viewing this in pagan parallels. Is he parallel to Greco-Roman myths? Is he parallel to ancient Near Eastern, Egyptian, Sumerian? Where are these parallels? And maybe you have characters you could take us into. So I'm going to leave the floor to you, but do me one favor before we get started. I feel like there's a demon in your webcam right now. If you can like move your camera or something to see if it just adjusts. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's see. Be gone, you devil, you. Nope. This spirit's stronger than the usual, so maybe we should put our tinfoil hats on. I think it'll leave. Go ahead, Dr. Bob.
One of the things that I find fascinating, though I've not heard anybody else say it, is that probably Adam was not the only first man myth held in ancient Israel. And there's a big reason to suspect that, because Genesis also speaks of someone named Enosh, not Enoch with a CH, but Enosh with the SH. And his name means man. And the name Adam doesn't. It means something like red earth. And what is going on here? It seems to me that Enosh, like in the New Testament, where Jesus is called the Son of Man, a phrase that appears in the Old Testament too, Bar Enosh, the son of Enosh, because Enosh means human being or man. So I think he got shoved to the side, either as a replacement or simply a variant that was preserved. But when the compiler of the J source of the Pentateuch was putting together the various fragments, the patches, and the quilt he was weaving, he just decided, well, I can't have two first men, so I'll take Adam and make him the first, because he appears in the Garden of Eden story and so on. I'll include Enosh, but later in the sequence. And what the only thing we are told about Enosh is that people in his day began to call upon the name of Yahweh or Jehovah. And that seems kind of weird, because he's called Yahweh earlier in the Garden of Eden story, etc. So what was new about Enosh? Well, it makes a lot of sense if Enosh is supposed to be the first man, and he's on first name basis with God, Jehovah or Yahweh. Where then did Adam come from? It seems like that Adam, it seems like a tangent, but it's not. In Hebrew and related languages, words were based on clusters of consonants. Nobody wrote down vowels. You just knew how to pronounce it from usage you hear. And so the vowels were understood, and it was only much later that they came up with vowel signs to guide pronunciation for reading aloud in the synagogue and so on. Well, the same three consonants could be juggled around a bit, and so you get shalom, peace in Hebrew, or salam, peace in Arabic, and Islam is the same basic combination of consonantal roots. Well, in the same way, Adam and Edom are the same consonants. And the vowels can vary, like even today. In Saudi Arabia, you would pronounce the name of their religion as Islam, but in most other Arab-speaking countries, it'd be Islam. And when let's see, the big terrorist Osama bin Laden, even the bin, that's the same thing as ibn in other Arabic dialects. It's the same thing as ben, B-E-N, in Hebrew. And Osama is a language variant of Uthman, one of the caliphs, or Usman. It starts to vary. So Edom and Adam appear to have been the same guy. Well, the ancient Israelites were related to the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Ishmaelites, as the Bible itself says, by having what they call eponymous ancestors. The first guy the first ancestor of the Moabites was named Me'ab. The first ancestor of the Ammonites was Ben-Ami. And the Ishmaelites, named after Ishmael, their progenitor, and so forth. Israel was the guy's name, so the Israelites. Well, why is it that the Edomites are said in the Bible to be the descendants of a guy named Esau? That doesn't sound much like it, and indeed it wasn't, though it's it's absolutely explicit that Esau is the father of the Edomites. Well, I think that's because in the original Edomite myth, the first man of the human race was Edom. And hence his descendants, the nation. He was the father of his country, the Edomites. Well, so that's what they must have called him. And like all these ancient groups, any particular tribe or whatever imagined that they were the original stock of the human race. And that's why God is imagined to be speaking Hebrew. And in the Eden story, Adam names all the animals, presumably telling the reader that why do we call it a so and so? Well, because Adam named that. In other words, Adam spoke Hebrew. In the priestly creation account, God speaks Hebrew. Because he divides the time into day, he called that day, and the night he called night. In other words, the Hebrew words in the Hebrew text, they just naively assume that, yeah, we were the first, we're the people, right? Many of the American Indian names simply mean the people. And so it's a natural thing. We don't have much of an idea of geography. And so, why is the ancestor of the Edomites in the Bible not called Edom? Well, that's because they were using the same name for the first man of the human race in the earlier story, or the story that appears earlier. Adam, and Adam meant Edom. It was the same thing. So they didn't want to have two guys with that name, and so they had Esau be the and he's described as they are the red hair. He's sort of a caveman almost. So right off the bat, Adam is a pagan parallel, if you want to throw in the Edomites, and he was the second first man, and displaced the other one. In the Eden story, he's not called one thing or another. At first, it's only in the beginning of chapter 4 that the one hitherto called the man, Ha-Adam, a common noun, is suddenly called Adam. It's just the man in the first, just like the woman is the woman. Well, what did her name denote? It says that the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living, and which she is in the story, of course. And this happens to have been the epithet, the title of Oruru, one of the mother goddesses of the Semitic nations. She also appeared in Asia Minor as Cybele, the mountain goddess. Her consort Attis was yet another version of Adam. But Eve is really the same name as personal name as Hebe or Heba. You have both versions. She was a Hittite goddess and a Greek goddess. She was one of the wives of Hercules in Greek mythology. And so she was a goddess originally, and she becomes basically the primordial Lucy Ricardo, right? Lucy is always told by Ricky, whatever you do, don't do this. And of course, that's the first thing she does. Same thing. Well, don't eat the fruit. Boy, you know she's going to do it. Don't open the box, actually, the jar. She does it. It's this, and everything goes to hell because of it. So she is, I don't know if you want to say borrowed. I don't know if anybody can tell who borrowed what from whom, but another version floating around. And she must have been, well, like Pandora, whose name means all gifts. She must have been a creator originally. All gifts come from her. But then they later redefined that by making her a kind of an android created by a committee of gods, each of whom gave her a gift of talent, like beauties, intelligence, etc. So there is a pagan parallel, if you want to call it that, or a pagan origin. Yet another aspect of the Adam and Eve story that we find in the surrounding cultures is Eve being made from a rib of Adam, or from the side of Adam. It's the same thing in Hebrew. And there are these great cartoons we wouldn't have if translators had gone with side, because like the cartoon where Eve is counting Adam's ribs and he's saying, honest Eve, there's no one else, and so forth. But if it means the side, well, based on that, ancient rabbis thought that the Adam, which just means the human being, not male or female, like anthropos in Greek. There are words for male and female in both languages, but the Adam is not just human being. What God did to create a companion for the human was to split him down the middle into two human creatures, one male, one female, and that's what happens when she was taken from the side of the Adam. And he says, "This at last is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones." Unlike the animals, which God had taken from the clay of the ground as he did the Adam. But every creature he made from the earth was different, and thus none were suitable for the Adam. Well, this is what the rabbi said, and that may indeed be the original point of it. He says, "She shall be called Ish-Shah because she was taken from Ish." Meaning one man from man. Same kind of a pun you could make in English. Well, this is suddenly a whole lot like what you have in, is it Plato's, is it the Symposium, I think, where somebody tells the story of how Zeus created human beings as we know them now. He said originally humans were sort of Humpty Dumpty figures. There were big ovals with two sets of everything. And so Zeus, but people are just hanging around, as indeed you might if you were shaped like Humpty Dumpty. I know I am, and I do. So what he did was to get some action going. He divided each of these egg-shaped humans into two, and there were three different versions. There were what would you call them? Well, these original beings, there were male ones, and when they divided, they became homosexuals, male homosexuals. There were female females, and when they were split, they were lesbians. And the ones that were both and were hermaphrodites, when Zeus cut them in half, they became heterosexual men and women. Now, why would this bring about action among the fledgling humans? They all wanted to rejoin. It's like in the old Ronald Reagan movie, "Where's the rest of me?" So this explains the sex drive and to the ancient Greeks. So this got everybody hopping. Well, in Zoroastrian mythology, just next door in ancient Iran, you had Ahura Mazda create the primal human being, Gaiomard, and he was a big ball with limbs, and he was, in this case, Ahriman, the evil god, split him in half trying to kill him, but instead he outwitted himself because each one was viable, and the same deal. Once they were cut apart, they wanted to get back together, and that's what led to the whole darn human race, the last thing Ahriman had wanted. So here again, these cross-cultural, cross-religion parallels illuminate the text, and it seems very likely that that's where the Bible writers got this, or the storytellers whose work was recorded by the Bible writers, and that I don't know if you want to, again, I don't know if you want to say they were borrowed from the adjacent cultures, or that it was just the general assumption, just like all the ancient people we know of believed the earth was flat and there was a solid dome and all that. Who knows? But it certainly indicates this is one more of these stories. Now that sounds like you're denigrating them. Oh, that's all it was. That's only offensive from the standpoint that, look, the Bible is absolutely distinctive because it was a revelation from God, and these other pagan hicks and heathens, they must have copied him. It's just like the thing with Jesus and the resurrection, the other gods dying and rising gods. They must have been plagiarized from Jesus. Now, The sources that we have indicate that the other versions are older, and so Adam turns out to not only be mythical, obviously, but the Hebrew version of Gaia Mard and so on and so on. There's yet another. This is not about Adam himself, but in the story in which he figures so prominently, the whole Eden story appears to be another version of the Prometheus myth. And in this one, you have, in a sense, the hero is the serpent, and who's not named but implicitly called Nahash, serpent, and he stems from the worship of the god Nehushtan, the ten being an honorific suffix like the great or something. He was apparently another version of Leviathan, same suffix for the same reason. Levi is a synonym for Nahas, both means serpent. Well, we're told in, was it, I guess, Second Kings, that Hezekiah ejected the various other gods who had been worshipped in the Jerusalem temple, and one of them was the bronze serpent, Nehushtan, to whom sacrifices of incense were offered. Well, Hezekiah was trying to come up with that. Well, I don't know if you'd say, well, I guess a monotheism or something close to it. So he kicked all the other gods to the curb, and this is complex, but all the more fascinating because of it. The writer, the Deuteronomistic writer of Kings, tells you that this was the brazen serpent that Moses had raised up in the wilderness as an apotropaic device, a device to turn away the snake bite poison of the people that God had inflicted, sent a bunch of snakes after him. What a loving deity. And so Moses had to create this thing. It's like a serpent, but it will get rid of the serpents. And why did they come up with that? It's obviously based on the caduceus of Apollo, healing god, and so on. But they had to redefine it once they decided, oh, you really can't worship Nehushtan anymore, at least not out in the open. So, hey, could we keep this thing as long as we said Moses developed it as a magical healing god? Oh, sure, no problem with that. But eventually they wait. Why are people offering incense to it? Oh, this is a scam. Get him out of here. And so he seems to go back to that. And this God, once worshipped alongside Yahweh and the others, is finally ejected. That doesn't mean people stopped believing in him. There must have been people who did.
And does this have any relevance to the serpent, them passing through the wilderness and needing to be bit by the serpent that's erected on a
that's
pole?
why it says Moses had this thing put together and raised up. And in fact, the serpents that God unleashed on him are called seraphim, which is the name of the highest group of angels, the fiery ones. So but if you called a snake that, you meant it's a poisonous snake. So he's kind of, the whole story is kind of repudiating the serpents in the name of their God. And, I
remember Michael Heiser using the same thing for the Genesis snake.
Oh yeah, that's who he is ultimately, and he's considered to be the father of all snakes. He's like Mr. Snake, because when God starts passing out the punishments, he says, I'm going to put enmity between you and the serpent, your seed and his seed, that is all future humans, all future snakes. You're going to be trying to bite one another and club one another with a garden hose or whatever. And that's because you conspired against God, and he's going to make sure it never happens again. So yeah, he becomes simply the prototype for snakes. But originally, I mean, how many snakes have you ever heard of who can speak to people? Right. So it's obvious he's more than that in the story.
Right.
Well, this is just like Prometheus. In the Greek story, Prometheus was a titan. That is, he was a member of the previous dynasty of gods that Zeus overthrew, the Titans, and there were a whole bunch of them too. And this is going to come up again in Noah, because there's a real interesting parallel there.
Awesome.
Well, Prometheus was Zeus's cousin because they were all related. And Zeus didn't care that much about the humans he had created, but Prometheus took pity on him. And he said, let the poor, stupid humans, they really need somebody to help them, to be their advocate. So he does this stunt where the newly created humans are being given the rules for how to serve Zeus. And that meant serve him food, sacrifices. And so they're trying to decide now what parts of an animal should we tell the humans to offer up to Zeus, and what parts can they keep? And as for the priests to eat, that was always what happened. You were having part of the food, and the god was having the rest. And Prometheus pulls this switcheroo. There are two big amphorae, these big jars with lids, and he fills the one with all the yummy meat, the steaks and all that stuff, and the other with the fat and the guts and stuff like this that nobody really wants to eat. But then he switched the top layers. So it appeared that the jar full of yummy meat is just the jar of the leftover crap, and that the jar of that stuff appeared on the surface to be steaks and such. And he said, well, Zeus, what do you think? And he said, I'm taking the steaks. And then only a few minutes later, when it was dinner time, he realized he'd been tricked by Prometheus. He said, that son of a bitch, I'm going to get even with him. But he got off on that one. But you see what's happened. The food that was supposed to be God's, Zeus's, is given to humans. That's kind of like what the serpent does, right? Says, now Jehovah told you not to eat his food, the tree of knowledge and good and evil, because it's poison, but it's not. He's just having you on. Eat it, you'll find good food and will bring you wisdom, which they do. And the narrator says, yeah, the serpent was telling them the truth. So God is pretty steamed about this. Well, the next thing that happens is that Prometheus sees the poor humans shivering with cold and says, these people need fire. And so he goes to the altar at Olympus. Why would they have one? Because they worshiped higher gods. Well, at any rate, he takes some of the fire and puts it in a papyrus cone to keep the wind from blowing it out. And he goes down to the earth and says, hey, everybody, come here. I want to show you something. And he shows them fire. They say, oh, and that's nice and warm. And there's light. And he says, here's how you make fires. And they do. Well, Zeus is unaware of this. And a little later, he looks down and sees all these little sparks of light across the landscape. And he said, what the hell? How'd they learn this? It must be Prometheus. And so he's taken knowledge and given it to the humans, whereas their creator did not want them to have it. And that's what happens in Eden, right? God doesn't want them to have the access to the tree of knowledge. And so this is too much. He sends Prometheus to Mount Etna, I think it is. And by the way, just as the serpent is said to be the wisest of all the creatures God had made, Prometheus's name means foresight. He can outwit Zeus easily because he's smarter. Well, he sends Prometheus to Mount Etna, where he is basically spread eagled against a boulder, crucified basically. And every day an eagle or a vulture, pretty much the same thing in Greek or in Hebrew, No, Greek. Yeah, we're talking about Zeus. And a vulture comes every day and tears at his liver and eats it. But miraculously, it grows back every day, and the vulture comes back to torture him again. Eventually, Hercules saves him. But it's very much like God cursing the serpent. He clips his wings because the serpent must have been winged like the seraphim in Isaiah 6, and says, from now on, you're locomoting on your belly. And this is supposed to be a terrible. I mean, ask any snake today if he could, he'd tell you, hey, we like doing that. But they imagined I wouldn't that, so it must have been a punishment, and so forth. So it's very parallel. And remember, Nehushtan and Prometheus were both discredited gods. Both were members of a pantheon that was now forbidden to the readers. Well, the who used to write these things? Scribes and priests and so forth. So it seems clear to me, though again, speculation. How could it be anything else? But any interpretation of it is speculation, that in both cases you had the priests who now could not confess their faith in their traditional gods still getting their licks in. And it's sort of just beneath the surface, but it was good enough to be snuck past the censors. That's how the Song of Solomon got in the Bible. It's the liturgy of Ishtar and Tammuz, the brother sister married couple of gods, and the one dies and the other brings him back. If you look closely at the text of the Song of Solomon, they once this became forbidden, they just cut the names basically, though not quite completely, because the woman is called the Shulamite, which means Shalmith, one of the titles of Isis, Ishtar Shalmith. So it's still in there, but now you can sing it just without those names. Will bleep them out, and it becomes part of the Bible. And there's lots of stuff like that where they had to tweak it and change it and censor it, and it seems pretty darn clear they did. And so that's what's going on in that. That's how Nehushtan is now just Mr. Snake.
I don't think it's too far fetched. I mean, yes, speculation, but you know, and this is me just not academic, okay? I don't get too caught up on, oh, there's not a dot there. Why are you putting a dot there? Like, if you put a magnifying glass on this stuff and that's how you really are reading these things, okay, yeah, you can find differences and dwell on them all day. But for me, like I watched, the recent shows with Thor and watching the different cool episodes that we have with the new Hercules movies that come out. You can easily point out who the enemy is real quick. You can find out who the sneaky one is real quick, okay? And it's simple to kind of see how that would be the serpent in this story. I mean, we do it like the Matrix, right? Which is obviously Gnostic in nature too, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, you can easily tell who the Messiah is. You can easily see all these interesting, as Joseph Campbell had said, he's written on the whole myth themes. There's hero archetypes. It's the same kind of stories. I actually think ever since I've learned this stuff and listening to you, I get more excited. I'm like you, Dr. Bob, in so many ways. It's not like I've now have hatred towards it. I see it for what it is, though,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it even more because now I want to find another ancient religion and find some weird way. Yeah, you can call me looking for parallels, but I have a good reason to do so. So I like what you did with this. I like how you're viewing this stuff.
One more, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. It just becomes so much more colorful and so forth. Another thing I almost left out about the Eden story that has a striking parallel in a neighboring myth. Excuse me, getting rid of another demon.
I was about to
Is
say.
the oddity about the tree of knowledge? Why is it forbidden, and why does the story suddenly seem to jump over into the issue of procreation? Why is Eve's punishment that she's going to have pain and childbearing and so forth? What's going on here? Well, it seems like the the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, though it's natural to infer that means they're now going to have a conscience and a system of moral judgment somehow. It doesn't appear to be the point, because how would the man and the woman, how could they be blamed for disobeying God if they didn't know what it meant that something was wrong? Like, you should have told us before. And it presupposes that they knew that would be wrong. So maybe that's not what the fruit of the tree is supposed to impart. And it seems pretty clear that what the tree did convey was the knowledge of procreation. And because there are 10 other times in the Old Testament where either the noun or the verb, knowledge or to know, denotes what we call carnal knowledge. I mean, we still even have that idiom. And the now it's not always that, but that's a pretty good number of times, and it makes you wonder: is that not what's being discussed here? Remember in the 7 day creation story of the P author, the priestly writer, no sooner does God make a whole bunch of men and women than he says, get busy procreating, multiply, and fill the earth. God doesn't ever say that in the Eden story, which is one of Jay's stories. He creates the Adam, the human, to be the gardener of Eden, which is a kind of a like a Persian pleasure garden for the king. And it's for himself and the other gods, which certainly exist because God is talking to somebody when he says, behold, they've become like one of us, and so on. That's not the editorial we or the royal we. Who's he talking to? He's not just saying we are displeased. He's saying, hey, look at this. Well, he doesn't. Okay, so the implication is that the gods eat from the trees of Eden, just like the ancient Vedic gods. They consumed the smoke from the sacrifices. So did Jehovah. It was a pleasing aroma, etc. And the Greek gods, they consumed the sacrificial smoke, and they also had um, ambrosia to eat and nectar to drink. We would translate that pizza and Coke, but they did have these divine foods. Well, this, but so he tells he needs somebody to tend the garden, and that's why he creates the Adam. Just as in the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the gods create humans as a bunch of staff of servants. Same thing, only they only need one, but it's a pretty easy job. And the Adam is getting bored and lonesome. And so Jehovah says, he's lonely. Let's make a helper fit for him, appropriate to him. And so he tries the animals one by one out of the ground. They don't work. Then again, he makes the woman just to be a companion. Nothing about procreation, though the writer does wink at you and says, this is why a man leaves his parents' house and cleaves to his wife, and so forth, because that's what's about to happen. They're innocent. They didn't know they were naked. It meant nothing to them any more than it does an animal. And then the serpent says, hey, I noticed you're eating from these trees, but you haven't had any of this fruit. What gives? And the woman says, apparently they're both there, but she's the spokesman. She says, oh, well, we can eat of any of the trees except this one, because God told us that if we ate it, that we die the same day. And the serpent said, what? That's not true. You won't die. I'll tell you what will happen, though. You will become like God, or gods, Elohim, same thing, knowing good and evil. And then it says, once she saw that the food was good for food, that is, it wouldn't kill her, right? It wasn't poison, and that it was desirable to make one wise, she took some of it and gave some to her husband with her. Most translations have skipped the with her because they want to preserve the idea that the woman was this scheming temptress and went and got him and so
Right.
forth. And then what does it say? The narrator, who we kind of have to believe about the story, says their eyes were opened. And then God sees this. Oh my gosh, look, they've become like one of us. That's exactly what the serpent said would happen. So what does this have to do with pagan parallels? Well, there's a big fat one in the Gilgamesh epic, because in this we find that human beings, well, Gilgamesh, his friend Enkidu has, well, let me start back a little bit. Gilgamesh is one of the Nephilim. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, it counts him among the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men. In Sumer, they said that he was somehow 2/3 God and 1/3 man. So kind of a weird recipe, but he's a demigod. And and he's abusing his privileges. He's sleeping with all the women in the cities, and forcing the men into battle, and eating all the food. And they pray to the goddess Oruru, can you give us a break? Can you distract this guy? And so she creates a champion, Enkidu, who is sort of a Tarzan character. She makes him out of the dirt of the ground, and his friends are animals. He's never seen a human being. So he's living like Tarzan and like Adam. And she sends one of her temple sacred prostitutes, or as I like to call them, the priestitudes, to Enkidu, to seduce him. And he's never seen a woman before. And naturally, I think the Hebrew has the phrase hubba hubba, so they go at it and have sex nonstop for a week. And after this, he's humanized, just like Adam and Eve, right? At first, they don't even know they're naked, but they take one bite of this thing. Oh, holy mackerel! And then sex is the result. Now it's arousing. It wasn't before. Well, same thing. Enkidu goes to the watering hole where he used to meet his buddies, the gazelles and the raccoons and all this stuff, and they run away in terror. And he says, "What is it? Is my breath or something? What's the deal here?" And the priestitude says to him, "Behold, Enkidu, you are become wise like a god." Well, that's the same thing as in Eden. The knowledge, he has become wise, is sexual in nature or in transmission. I don't know what. And now he's alienated from the animals, and he is like a god. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. Freud was right about what this meant. So, again, this is another version of the same thing. And then about the plant, does the fruit not occur in it? Well, it does, but at a later stage in the story. Enkidu and Gilgamesh do have a big fight, but they wind up admiring each other and becoming friends. And they have various nifty adventures. But finally, Enkidu is killed, and Gilgamesh cannot take this, and he says there's got to be a way to bring him back to life. And so he goes out under the earth and finds the flood hero who built the ark, which I'm going to get to when we're talking about Noah. And he says, "You've been given immortality by the gods. I've got to revive my friend. How can I do it?" And he says, well, you go to the shore of the subterranean lake, and there is a root at the bottom of the lake. So you're going to have to dive down and get it. And so, okay, I think I can do that. So he goes, he sees it, he gets it, he brings it out. and deposits it on the shore, but he's all sweaty and everything, so I'm gonna bathe down here first. While he's doing it, a serpent comes and steals the root, and Gilgamesh has lost the hope of immortality. It's just it's the same stuff reshuffled, which is what you always find in cognate myths. They're not exactly the same. They vary in oral transmission, but to me, these are startling parallels that are not just coincidences. Parallelomania. It's
Dr. Bob, that was wonderful. First of all, that was amazing. I wanted to take us somewhere, but before I do, I want to say that you know, I must be a god then. You know, I must be a god. That's all I can say. I got an awesome wife, you know? And anyway, that's so brilliant, though, how you could see these parallels. Honestly, I think
and
that's
none of it is my. I've just read it in the works of scholars.
this is, I mean, that's most of the stuff we do is we pick things we learn from brilliant men and we apply it. I gotta before we move on to our next episode, I have to probe with you. It appears, let's go to the New Testament. And I think it's important with the Adam myth, okay, and why this is so important. These authors are using this story, and they talk about a last Adam and a new creation and some weird crap's going on. And then you get to the book of Revelation, call it the book of Revelation, Revelations, Apocalypse, whatever the heck you want to call it, because I call the Septuagint, I should just say LXX, because it's just something I naturally do. Anyway, that book, the author clearly speaks of Jesus, the last Adam. If I'm right in saying that, okay, if he thinks that Jesus is this last Adam.
That's in 1 Corinthians.
Right. I just didn't know if there's a similar, because I know that's why I said that, because their theology might not be the same. The Pauline theology in Corinthians may not be the same of understanding of this character, but that book, Revelation, the author's indicating that Jesus is the tree of life. And he's not only the tree, he's the fountain of living water, he's this, he's that. And of course, Christians just go, well, he's also the door, he's also the vine, he's also these things. To me, does that have any effect on showing that Jesus is myth? And I'm not talking about, did the author view Jesus as a man in any way? Because this seems like he's using similar divine language like you would with Adam, the way that you're, looking at Adam here in a very mythological aspect. How do you think the author's looking at Jesus here?
Well, some people have said that the book of Revelation was purely Jewish and is the earliest New Testament book. I mean, there's arguments for and against, but the fact that Jesus appears as an angel in the beginning. It says that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ that God showed John by sending his angel. And then when you have the vision there with this figure, the risen Jesus, the Son of God, whose eyes are as a flame of fire, and so on, he's described down to the details as looking like Gabriel in the book of Daniel, who is explicitly an angel. And it even, so that's who we're talking about here. Hugh Schoenfield, in his translation of the authentic New Testament, which I love, he in his comments speaks of the angel Messiah. And I think that's pretty, I mean, that's not part of the translated text, but when he comments, that's a pretty good description. And because he's obviously depicted as the revealing angel. And what's the first vision he communicates to John the seer? It's the scene in the heavenly throne room, and there is the lamb that was slain, and doesn't say crucified exactly, Later on, there's a reference to the crucifixion, that Jerusalem was Sodom and uh, Babylon or whatever, where their Lord was crucified. But boy, I tell you, this is such an intricate thing. That is in, I think, chapter 11. Well, chapter, sorry to keep spinning this out.
It's
You
okay.
know how it says that there's the angel gives John the little scroll, and he eats it and prophesies. Scholars have long thought that that means that this section, at least with the two witnesses, is an earlier work incorporated into the book of Revelation. Well, I only learned the other day that we know what that work was. There's this thing called the Oracles of how do you say it? It's Hystaspes, I think. It's a Zoroastrian work that has a lot of the same stuff, and that probably chapters 11 through 13 are a reworked version of this, and that's the only thing that mentions the crucifixion. Did the author think of the whole book of Revelation? Did he picture the lamb that was slain in heaven? It doesn't say anything about an incarnation in this, and so that makes you wonder if they did believe in a human Jesus, because after all, when Jesus dictates those 7 letters, he's the Son of God, but he's an angel. And so you could, and then when he comes to earth with the robe soaked in blood and all of that, at the head of an angelic army, that's a little hard to identify with Jesus, the rabbi from Nazareth. So, yeah, it's quite open to a mythic reading, it seems to me. Who knows, though, right? Not sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll leave it at that because I can give there's so many ideas that Christians who and there's preterists that try to make sense of this, and they say, well, this is evidence, internal evidence that they're trying to say proves that the book of Revelation is kind of putting an end cap, an end to the story, and the story, comes later after the Gospels, after Paul, and here it is. But they harmonize. Once again, here's harmonizing, and they use stuff like in the beginning, in the beginning of that book, it talks about the angel of the Lord being sent by the Father to reveal things which must soon take place. And they'll say, hey, this is something that had to happen soon. And then they'll go to other places in the Gospels using the text we were given by church fathers. Once again, kind of like, I don't understand that logic if the preterists are being handed the books from people who did not buy what the preterists are saying. Anyway, I'm just making the point, like they harmonize these texts that we were given by church fathers and say, well, if the gospel says soon, if Paul says soon, and if Revelation says soon, they belong together. Well, have you ever thought of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Did you know that they didn't have the Gospels like what we see here, and they thought something was going to happen soon? Should we also implement those into the 27 New Testament book canon because they say something's going to happen soon? I don't know. And if you look at them, their enemy is blatantly, clearly Rome. Like it's obvious Rome is their enemy. Whereas in the New Testament, this is where scholars have been entertaining lately. One guy, Dr. David Skrbina, thinks that Rome's actually the enemy in the New Testament. Paul's recruiting to go against Rome. The New Testament Gospels are against Rome. Everything's against Rome, which we've already discussed some of this off air before about these things. And then James Stevens Valiant comes on and says, are you kidding me? Like, why would you have the enemy be Rome? And he goes into all these evidences, right, to try and make his point. And both sides split over these things. But if the Gospels and the New Testament aren't against Rome, and they have an apocalypse coming soon, what's going on? How can you harmonize this? Like, there's just everybody's an apocalyptic minded type people. So anyway, I just wanted to end on that with this. I think there's a lot of Adam into the New Testament, and with that in mind, the way that you phrased this, now when we read the New Testament, I wonder if authors of the New Testament are looking at Adam somewhat as this myth, or are they like buying the literalist approach that we hear Christians talk, where it's like, oh, yep, this one guy, literally, this is the one true story, like the way that Christians espouse the Bible narrative, like they do with Jesus. This is the
I
one
think
true.
the Pauline argument in First Corinthians and in Romans certainly implies he thought Adam really did exist and really did make that false step that condemned the human race to death. He says, just as one man's disobedience led to death for all men, so the one man's obedience will bring life to everybody. And if there wasn't one man, it's like you can say, if you want to allegorize Adam, that well, all right, it just is talking about the fallen nature of human beings, but the point is one guy was responsible for that, and that's how one guy can fix it. The counterpart, if it was just humanity in general falling, would be that everybody would repent. But no, we don't need a savior in that case. So that he has to have a second Adam, the last Adam, whom I translated as the Adam at the end of time, which is really the point, because it was a common apocalyptic view that the end sight, the last days, would repeat elements of the Urzeit, the primordial time of creation. And that's why a second Adam must come. And that's why Leviathan, whom God defeated in order to create the world, has to resurface at the end, and various other things, so it does make sense, but all of it does presuppose this happened and will happen again. Oh, by the way, I just got to throw in one other thing about Revelation.
Okay.
You know, when you have the nativity of the child who is destined to rule the nations with a rod of iron, is this Jesus? It doesn't exactly say so. And he's given birth by this heavenly virgin. Doesn't say it's Mary. And but the dragon comes to devour the child, and to prevent that, they give the woman a pair of wings to fly away to the wilderness where he can't find her. This comes right out of Greek mythology, where Uranos, the first Titan, he begets kids, and he's afraid that one of them will turn on him when he grows up and defeat him, so he devours all of them. And his wife is getting pretty darn sick of this, and so she, when let's see, when Zeus is born. No, that's jumping ahead. She manages to bring back the kids he's eaten somehow, and there are 5 brothers of his begetting, and they do castrate Uranos, and that's good enough because that removes his right to rule. And then but then one of those brothers, Cronus, decides, well, Dad's strategy wasn't bad. I don't want to get dethroned by one of my offspring. So he starts eating them. And he manages to eat most of them. But Rhea, his wife, says, here's what we're going to do. As soon as baby Zeus is born, they wrap him in swaddling clothes and take him out to the wilderness, to an island, and they put a rock in swaddling clothes, and the Cronus eats him. You know, this is a little crunchy, and then Zeus comes back and destroys Cronus. But the idea that the child destined to rule is about to be killed almost in the womb and is taken away with his mother to this distant island or wilderness. I mean, it's the same thing. And there are even a couple of Greek names. Hades appears in the book of Revelation and so forth. But anyway, that's pretty darn mythological.
And the Christians usually say, oh, well, that's Mary. That's Jesus. Oh, and that dragon, that's Herod. And it's interesting that you bring this up because this does go to the heart, I think, of this kind of mythology making of characters in history.
Mm.
You look at you can say right here with the pagan parallel, okay, you look at the Greek mythology, you could say the same thing is actually happening in the narrative of the gospel with Herod chasing the newborn child, etc.
Because that's a historicized version of the same myth, and there's
Right.
a Jewish one, and there are various other ones. A great essay about this by James M. Robinson, a disciple of Bultmann, and it's just so illuminating. It shows you what is going on in this stuff. And I always like to say to biblical literalists, you think there are puzzles in the Bible that you're going to have to wait till you're dead to learn about in heaven. These answers exist right now. Here they are. Unfortunately, you just don't like them.
Yeah. And there was one person who said that you literalized the 144,000 in Revelation or something, like you took it literal instead of allegorical. I don't think you did. I think you made a brief comment, didn't spend much time on it, but that they were literal virgins, right? We made a little passing remark. These are literal 144,000 virgins. And maybe you want to comment on that. We'll stop this one and get to Noah.
Yeah, they it does say they are virgins who have not defiled themselves with women. Well, the two statements seem to be tantamount to one another, and we know there were lots of Christians in the first 3 centuries who were Encratites, and they thought you had to get back to Edenic celibacy because the sin had, they understood that the man and the woman were not supposed to have sex, because if they did, and if they ate of the tree of life, this is why they're kicked out. You're going to have an endless race of immortal gods, and they don't, the Jehovah and the others don't want that. So yeah, this idea was still apparent to some people, the Encratites especially. So they said, like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, we got to get ourselves back to the garden. And that's salvation. You must be celibate to be saved. You don't need to take that symbolically. It implies that the writer of Revelation was an Encratite.
Wow. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you guys check out the description. Go to the Amazon link, buy everything that Dr. Bob's putting out, because this is the kind of fire that I love to hear, Dr. Bob. This is the level of content that I love to see brought forth. And so make sure you guys become a patron, of course. Make sure you guys show him some support. This is what he does now. You guys want to hear more from him? Help him out so that way we can bring this. This is just the first episode dealing with Adam. We're going to see you guys here soon for the second episode. Thank you for joining me on this one, Dr. Bob.
Oh, great to be with you.